Hello and welcome to the Craft Beer Corner. For today's beer review, we are doing yet another in our ongoing Tavour series where I'm reviewing tons of different beers from Tavour, the online craft beer aficionados beer delivery service to your door. If you haven't caught that many episodes and you don't know about Tavour, I encourage you to look them up. You can check them out on their website or you can download their app from both the Android and iTunes store. It is flat rate shipping. You load up on beers. They pop up new ones every day. You decide what you want and how many you want. And they all come shipped to your door within about a 3 to 4 week window. You can extend it if you just want to stock up and have even more beers in your delivery. But it's all for one flat fee plus the cost of each beer that you order. Nonetheless, today we are jumping in to an Imperial Stout review. And it's from two brewers that I haven't had beers from prior. So I'm very excited about that. The first of which is Stillwater Artisinal. This beer is called Inspired by a Fancy Chocolate Bar. It's an Imperial Stout brewed with cocoa, avocado honey, and both cane and milk sugar. Clocks in at 10% ABV, and Stillwater Artisinal is based out of Brooklyn, New York. Number two is from Bombastic Brewing. This is called Murder on Drury Lane. Also an Imperial Stout. This one's brewed with Dutch cocoa, Tahitian vanilla, lactose, and as they eloquently put it, a boatload, I believe, of double chocolate muffins. This one clocks in at 11% ABV, and they are based out of Haley, Idaho. So two big chocolatey Imperial Stouts, both with a little milk sugar, lactose, so they might be milk stouts of the Imperial variety, slightly sweet, and can't wait to jump into both. So we're going to get started with the Stillwater Artisanal, inspired by a fancy chocolate bar. This one clocks in at 10% ABV. Okay, so jumping right in with the first beer of today's Imperial Stout review. We have got Stillwater Artisanals, inspired by a fancy chocolate bar. Imperial Stout brewed with cocoa, avocado honey, cane, and milk sugar. They are based out of Brooklyn, New York, though it's worth noting this was brewed and canned by Oliver Brewery for them in Baltimore, Maryland. This one clocks in at 10% ABV. So starting off in terms of label art, it's very clean design, and indeed it does kind of rather remind me of a wrapper on a very fancy, expensive chocolate bar. So they got that going for it. It looks very nice, and the color scheme is nice, fits with the beer style. So let's get this cracked gently. All right. And poured right into our glass. Oh, that's very dark. It looks kind of thick, but not as thick as I expected it to be glugging out of the can at 10%. But it looks nice. It's very, very deep, deep dark black. All right. It appears to be pretty effervescent, so I don't think that head's going to hold too long. It formed one okay, but it's, yeah, it's quite active. Looks like it's just going to scoot out of the way, which, you know, not the end of the world, but I like a head on my stouts. Visually, yeah, I hold this up. You can see the carbonation. It's quite active, and it is absolutely pitch black. There's no light getting through that at all. It's got a little bit of cling to the sides left in terms of a head, but that's about it. Let's give it a sniff. Okay. So the aroma on this is not pungent at all. You've really got to get right down over the beer and breathe quite deeply and give it some agitation, but its aroma is quite weak. What I can smell smells a bit like a roasty malt bill, and I can smell some kind of chocolate notes and a little sweetness and a little bit of booze, but mostly it's a very, very weak aroma. So let's hope when we jump in for a dive here that the taste flips that around. Let's jump in. Okay, so the aroma may be weak, but the flavor is not. This is a pretty big beer. It's not whack you in the face big, but it's full of flavor. The first thing that I thought when I got it in my mouth was that the roasty malt bill is imparting this coffee-like undertone. And there's no coffee in this. It's not brewed with coffee, but it's producing a coffee undertone. And that's pairing very, very well with the cocoa that they put in, because that's got natural richness to it, and they're kind of binding together. And the slight hint of booze I could pick up on the aroma does come through just at the beginning of the beer, and it's immediately out of the way. So it's not what I would term boozy. The sweetness that they got in here from the milk sugar is not overboard. It's not over the top. So this tastes more like a milk chocolate bar that's on the border between being milk chocolate and dark chocolate, based on, you know, how much that they have in specific percentage-wise of cocoa. It tastes rich. It does taste rich and chocolatey, but it's also got this coffee undertone. And the avocado honey, you know, call it a gimmick if you will. I'm sure it's adding something to the beer, but I can't really pick anything out and say, oh, that's honey, or oh, that's avocado honey. Same thing with the cane sugar. It's really a story of the cocoa and the milk sugar, because the milk sugar is the lactose that can't be converted into alcohol, which lends that underlying sweetness. But they used a light hand so that it comes off with more rich. It just accentuates the chocolate side of it and that kind of sweetness that they added with the cane and the avocado honey. So overall, this is a more rich milk Imperial Stout, if you want to term it that, than anything else. It's not an astringently sweet milk stout in that regard. Let me jump back in for body and mouthfeel. I'm going to start to really think on this flavor development. Body overall, I'd say, is on the border between medium and medium heavy. It's not as big and robust as you'd expect for a 10% ABV. Mouthfeel, kind of the same story here. It feels like a wetter stout, not like a dry stout. And there's some active effervescence you can feel in your mouth. It doesn't have a ton of viscosity, but when you agitate it around the palate, it gets a little thicker. It gets creamy. But overall, it's not as big or as thick as I anticipated for the style in the ABV range. That said, it's pleasant. It's pleasant in the mouth, and it does have presence, so you know you are drinking a higher ABV beer. In terms of this flavor development, it's kind of interesting. This beer has some interesting, subtle flavor cues that pop in and out, and I don't know where I'm getting them from. Maybe the combination of the avocado honey and the cane sugar that's mixing with that lactose that's in there to kind of bring out that sweetness so you can actually taste the ingredients, which is always a good idea. If you're putting in these extra ingredients that have sweet factor to them, if you don't add in the lactose, they're just going to get lost in the beer. That's just the way that it works. And the fact that they kept this rich without adding too much lactose, I think was a good play. So you're getting these rich layers of flavor, and yeah, there's enough sweetness to bring them out and say, oh yeah, I can taste that, without it being overboard, without it being pungently sweet. I think it's a good decision. I appreciate the balance that they used in this beer overall. I would say it's well balanced. Let me jump back in for one more sip to think on these flavors. Yes, that sweetness up front, that's where you get it. It mixes with that booziness. And then you get this rich layer of coffee, roasted malt, and underlying deep, rich chocolate. And then what I presume is the avocado honey I'm tasting, mixing with that cane sugar. It does make its presence known. All of the ingredients you can pick out. And it's very, very nice. This does put me in mind of an expensive top shelf chocolate bar. No question about it. This tastes fancy. And it's a very good beer. I think it's very well balanced. And frankly, I think they did a good job with this one. And it's not so big that you're going to feel like, oh, that's so heavy by the time you're done drinking it. But it's big enough and it's got enough presence and it's rich enough that it's one that you're going to take your time sipping on and enjoying. And I fully expect, even though I start all my beers at British cellar temperature, 55 degrees Fahrenheit, I imagine as this gets warmer, it's just going to get progressively richer. And for me, will frankly be even more enjoyable as time goes on. I enjoy this one. I'm going to take my time sipping on it, come up with my scores. When we come back, we will get to the second beer of today's Imperial Stout review. That is Bombastic Brewing's Murder on Drury Lane. Imperial Stout brewed with Dutch cocoa, Tahitian vanilla, lactose, and double chocolate muffins. That one clocks in at 11% ABV. Okay, moving on to the second beer of today's Imperial Stout review, we have got Bombastic Brewing's Murder on Drury Lane. This is Imperial Stout that's been brewed with Dutch cocoa, Tahitian vanilla, lactose, and double chocolate muffins. So I think that just sounds awesome. 11% ABV on this one. They are based out of Haley, Idaho. In terms of label art, this one's pretty cool. It's another one of these really neat, looks kind of like pen, ink on paper kind of drawing. I'll try to angle that so that the light doesn't glare all over you. But suffice to say, it's got a couple of crows duking it out over what looks like slices of cake. Murder on Drury Lane. Murder is a group of crows, by the way. So that's hence the crows on top. Nonetheless, let's get this cracked. Gently. All right. And poured right in the glass. Okay, so this one visually looks quite a bit thicker pouring out than the prior. It looks very, very thick, very dark and very thick. That lactose is going to add some thickness to it at any rate. All right, I was being as vigorous as I could near the end there. Didn't do much in the way of a head. As I said, it looked quite thick. But I can see some carbonation working up. It looks to be mostly very, very fine carbonation bubbles coming up to the top. So it did make a little pad on top. Nonetheless, visually, as expected, that's pitch black. There's no light getting through that at all. And I can tell you, this beer does have a pretty pronounced aroma. I can smell it from a foot away, but if I get right up over it and give it a sniff, oh yeah. Boy, that smells really nice. It smells big. It smells chocolatey, slightly boozy, which is not unexpected given the 11% ABV. But it does smell very dessert-like. So it's got all this chocolate, the Tahitian vanilla, the double chocolate muffins, and the lactose to give it a little sweet back. So I imagine this is going to fall squarely in the categorization of a dessert stout. But let's go ahead and jump in and just find out exactly what this is about. Oh yeah, that's a big beer. Ooh, that's very big. Getting nice roasty undertones as well. Slight kind of coffee scents from the deep, deep roasted malts. They have some really, really deeply roasted malts in this. There's no question. And it's mixing with all the chocolate and the double chocolate muffins it's already got in, and it's making this rich, deep chocolate flavor. It's not so much sweet chocolate as it is rich, deep, dark chocolate, which it's got Dutch cocoa and then double chocolate muffins. And the lactose they used, it seems like they went sparingly with it because it does have a little sweetness to it, but it's not overt. So it really is playing up more the richness of the cocoa, less so than it is playing on, say, like a sweetened or milk chocolate kind of vibe. The Tahitian vanilla that's in there, I didn't get on first sip, so I'm going to think about it as I go back in and think about the body and mouthfeel and how these flavors develop. I can tell you my initial reaction was this is a big beer. It's got a big body and a thick, viscous mouthfeel, but I'm going to confirm that while I start to explore these flavors. Yeah, the body I would say is medium heavy, but the mouthfeel is crazy, crazy viscous. It's super thick. You can just feel its thickness as it moves around your mouth. It doesn't get ridiculously creamy if you start to really agitate it around the palate, but you can really feel just how much resistance there is from the beer's thickness when you do so. It's supremely big, supremely thick. I was thinking more on that than the flavors. I was enjoying the flavors, but I got to go back in for one more sip to really see how these all pan out, make sure I'm not missing anything. Slight booze kick, slight hint of sweetness, Then it opens immediately into rich, deep cocoa. It's properly cocoa, dark, dark, dark chocolate. The vanilla seems to be more of a suggestion, kind of where it mixes with that slight sweetness and a little bit of booze you get up front. That's where I'm getting the vanilla. It's very underneath the cocoa. Overall, I would say this is a rich cocoa, kind of dark chocolate in intensity beer. That's really where the bulk of the flavor is coming from. And it's very rich. It's very, very, very rich. It's a heavy beer. In terms of how the flavor develops thereafter, it doesn't get ridiculously more intense after when it initially starts, and then it just kind of holds there and slowly decays. I could tell you the finish on this, it's longer than average, but it's not ridiculously long. And where it finishes off is a nice clean, roasty, malty back with just this rich, rich dark chocolate and cocoa undertone to it. Overall, very good beer. I like this a lot. I'm going to take my time, sip on this, come up with my scores, and when we come back, we will get both beers ranked from top to bottom. Okay, now that we've gotten to enjoy both of these beers, we're going to get them ranked, starting with the Stillwater Artisinal, inspired by a fancy chocolate bar. Imperial Stout brewed with cocoa, avocado honey, cane, and milk sugars. They're based out of Brooklyn, New York, and this one clocks in at 10% ABV. Starting with the aroma on this beer was very, very, very weak. It was nearly indiscernible. You had to agitate it vigorously and get right down in it to really pick up anything. When you did, you could smell that it was slightly sweet, slightly chocolatey, had some other interesting flavors, but overall, the pungency wasn't there. It was hard to get a good read on the beer just from the aroma. It gets a 2 out of 10. For the taste, I did overall enjoy the taste of this beer. It had some interesting and unique flavors underlying it. I don't know if that's from the avocado honey, if it's from the mix of cane and milk sugars, or the type of cocoa they used. It was more or less a richer stout to be certain, but there was something about it I couldn't put my finger on that just tasted peculiar. But I did still enjoy the beer overall, and I did think it was above average. It gets an 8 out of 10. For the body, this is a 10% ABV Imperial Stout. I expected it to be pretty robust, and it was, but it wasn't top tier. It was above average. It just gets a 7 out of 10. The mouthfeel, same story as with the body. It had a decent bit of viscosity, but again, for 10% ABV, I expected it to have a lot more thickness than it did. It was above average as well. It gets a 7 out of 10. For the finish on this beer stuck around for a reasonable amount of time. It was certainly above average, but it was nowhere near top tier. And what did linger was really kind of that underlying interesting flavor I couldn't really pick out, mixed with the cocoa that they added in. So it did have this kind of underlying fancy chocolate bar vibe about it, no question, but it didn't get quite as much presence as I would have liked, especially considering the ABV. It gets a 7 out of 10. For the head and retention, it was okay. It was just average and really only just. It gets the low end of average. It gets a 4 out of 10. For the appearance, this was a textbook perfect Imperial Stout appearance. It was absolutely pitch black. It gets a 10 out of 10. For the balance, overall I enjoyed the balance of this beer. I thought that the individual ingredients that they used, they did in a really good ratio to one another. I just was having a hard time figuring out what the interesting flavor was I couldn't put my finger on. I'm guessing it's perhaps the combination of the avocado honey and the cane mixed with the lactose sugar, but honestly, it was hard to say. There was this underlying interesting flavor about it, but it wasn't overtly overbearing. The fancy chocolate bar side of this beer did really make its way through, and really the only thing I kept thinking in the back of my brain was I wish I had a little more of a presence from the roasty malts that clearly went into this beer. I only docked 1 point though. It gets a 9 out of 10. For the feeling and the intangible, I enjoyed this beer. Again, I'm a massive fan of Imperial Stouts. I'll take them standard, I'll take them milk stouts, I don't really care. And I always like trying ones that have new and interesting ingredients in it, and this certainly had that. Overall, I thought it was above average, but it was not top tier status. There's a lot of great Imperial Stouts out there, milk or otherwise, and this one was good, but it was not top tier in my mind. It gets a 7 out of 10. Finally, it's an example of the style. Again, just as my own personal subjective feelings on the matter, there are a lot of beers out there in this style. This was a good one. Make no mistake, it was a good one. Even though I had some categories that got beat up pretty hard, overall I did enjoy the beer, and I thought it was an interesting approach to making an Imperial Stout. That said, I don't think it was anywhere near top tier status. I get the vibe they were going for, and I think more or less they succeeded, but it just wasn't as good as many offerings out there. It still gets above average. It gets a 7 out of 10, which brings the total score to Stillwater Artisinals, inspired by a fancy chocolate bar, to a 68 out of 100. So this is the high end of average on the cusp of above average, and frankly, the numbers, I think, set it right about where I thought about it based on my objectivity. It's a good beer. I think that there's a lot of people that would enjoy it, and it certainly was one of the more unique Imperial Stouts that I've tried. Moving on to beer number 2. Bombastic Brewing, yet again, another beer from a brewer I've never tried any. This was Murder on Drury Lane, also an Imperial Stout brewed with Dutch cocoa, Tahitian vanilla, lactose, and double chocolate muffins. Sounds awesome, and I did enjoy it. 11% ABV on this one, based out of Haley, Idaho. Starting with the aroma, this was one of those beers that the aroma was just ridiculously pungent. You could smell it from a great distance away. It gets a perfect 10 out of 10. For the taste, I really enjoyed this as well. I knew it was brewed with lactose, so you can call it an Imperial Milk Stout, but the way that they balanced it out in terms of ratios and proportions and to get the flavor that they built, I think was really, really well done. It wasn't overtly sweet, so you still got this nice roasty malt backbone flavor that came through and mixed with that rich cocoa and just the hint of the vanilla and the muffin presence. It was clearly in there. It added some extra chocolate layers, but honestly, I think I would have liked a little more of that. I don't know how you would do it other than greater volume or maybe a bit more lactose, which then could have thrown everything else off. But I only dock 1 point. It gets a 9 out of 10. For the body, this was a big beer, 11% ABV, and it had real solid presence to it. It was not as large in terms of the body as I did anticipate, but it only missed the mark by a margin. I docked 1 point. It gets a 9 out of 10. For the mouthfeel was even more thick and viscous and lush than I was anticipating. It gets a perfect 10 out of 10. For the finish on this beer was nice. It kind of reminded me of the finish on the prior beer, where the flavors stuck around longer than average, but they weren't top tier. It died out much quicker than I was hoping and than I anticipated, because a beer that has this much going for it, this many interesting ingredients, I really like to let it just kind of keep doing its thing and let different flavors interplay all the way to the tail end, and it certainly did, but I just was longing for more length on each sip. It was still above average though. It gets a 7 out of 10. For the head and retention. The head and the retention on the first one was not great. On this one, it was almost embarrassing. It barely formed a head, and it didn't retain well at all. It only gets a 2 out of 10. For the appearance was another classic textbook, perfect Imperial Stout, absolutely pitch black. It gets a 10 out of 10. For the balance on this beer, I really appreciated. Again, there were a few little facets that I found myself longing for, but overall, given the ingredient bill that they used to make this, I'm not sure how they could have played it up any differently than they did. I would have liked a little more malt backbone, even though it was quite present in this, and I would have liked a little more interplay from the muffins, but I think the only way to do that is to add more lactose, and then it starts sweetening it up even more and totally throwing off the rest of the vibe of the beer. It was close, but not perfect for me. I docked 1 point. It gets a 9 out of 10. Feeling in the intangible. I loved it. I really did. I thought this was a fantastic beer. Just a few little nitpicks to keep it from top tier status for me. It gets a 9 out of 10. Finally, is an example of the style. I come back to this. There's a lot of Imperial Stouts out there, many that are flavored, many that are lactose added milk stouts, and this was a very, very fine one. Is it the top rung? In my opinion, no, but it's not far off the mark. I only docked 1 point. It gets a 9 out of 10, which brings the total score on Bombastic Brewing's Murder on Drury Lane to an 84 out of 100. So all total, we're looking at a 16-point spread here, a 68 versus an 84. Both were good beers. This one I still think I got ranked appropriately, as did this. This is clearly above average, and this is on the high end of average, encroaching on above average territory. Though, again, it all comes down to individual likes and dislikes and personal taste. I mean, I'm rating objectively other than my one subjective category, so objectivity does bear the lion's share of how the points are getting tallied, but at day's end, what I like, no, you know, others may not. They may have completely different tastes than I do, and that's what I'm here, just to explain to you what I describe, so it's up to you to determine what you think you will or won't like. Folks, that's today's review. As always, I do sincerely appreciate you tuning in today. Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you want to stay in the loop when our videos go live to YouTube, you can just click the notification bell icon. It is right next to the subscribe button. Until next time, keep it beer, keep it craft. We'll see you on the next one. Cheers.